Okay. If everyone could have a seat, please. We've solved our technical difficulties, so we're going to go ahead and start now this side event with the Cryosphere Pavilion's early scientists, early volunteers. Thank you. As most of you are aware, we have early career. My name is Pam Pearson. I'm the director of the International Cryosphere Climate Initiative. As most of you are aware, each year we have early career scientist volunteers for each week that come and volunteer their time and especially their knowledge at the Cryosphere Pavilion. Each week is a different group, so today is the first day for the week 2 early career scientists, and they're going to all present their research at this side event and also talk a bit about what brought them to cryosphere science. So the first up is Dr. Chen Zhao, who is at the University of Tasmania, and will be talking about Antarctica and its relationship to sea level rise. Chen, please.
Thank you, Pam. Good morning, everyone. I'm Chen Zhao from the Australian Antarctica Program Partnership, University of Tasmania. Firstly, I want to say thank you to the ICCI for giving me this opportunity to share my research here. And secondly, I want to say thank you to AAPP for supporting my trip here. It's my first time in Cove. I'm very excited about everything going on around. And today I'm going to talk about sea level rise and also how my research contributed to this. And before I start my talk, I want to introduce more about myself. I'm a glaciologist and also an ice sheet modeler. And my research interest is more to explore the Antarctic contributions to the sea level rise using numerical models. So models are probably my weapon, and my target is to try to explore the Antarctic mass loss from using the models. So my research today is more about the Antarctica sea level rise, contribution to sea level rise using numerical models. But as a modeler, I don't have too much chances go to Antarctica for field work, but luckily I got a contract job as an expedition guide during my PhD, so I got a chance to visit a lot of polar regions and like Antarctic Peninsula in the south, and Svalbard in the north, and Greenland. And I found those polar regions are fantastic. There are so many beautiful views there, the cute animals. But I also shocked by the coming events just happened in front of me. And all these kind of stuff just give me more and more motivations to continue my research on Antarctica. So that's why I'm here. And today I'm just going to share my latest research on the Antarctic contribution to the sea level rise. Okay, back to sea level rise. We all know that sea level rise is one of the most tangible impacts of the changing climate. And sea level rise is mainly caused by the melting of the ice from the glaciers and the ice sheets, and also the thermal expansion due to a warming ocean, and also the land water storage changes. But also we all know that the sea level rise is kind of moving a lot. If we look at this plot here on the left, we can see that since 1880, the sea level has risen about 21 to 24 centimeters. And this is a big number. And we know that in the past century, the sea level rise it was mainly caused by the melting of the ice from the glaciers and ice caps, and also the thermal expansion. But in the past decades, actually, Antarctic ice sheet and Greenland ice sheet contribute a lot contribute to the sea level rise. So that's the point I want to make here. And if we look at the plot on the right, this is the average sea level rise in the past relative to the 1997 level. And we can see that the blue color means the sea level is rising. You can tell from this plot it's happening everywhere. Okay, those is some coastal communities. They are facing the risk of the rising sea level rise and also the coastal flooding. And as we know that up to 410 million people, they're living in the areas of less than 2 meters above sea levels. They are facing the risk of the sea level rising and also coastal flooding. According to our latest research published in the Nature Communications, we know that up to 200 million people in the world will live below they will be affected by the higher annual sea level rise and also more rapid coastal flooding. And here I want to emphasize the impacts of sea level rise on the coastal regions, especially for the small island nations. For those people from these nations, their sea level rise is much higher than the average. And this plot here on the right just gives us a general idea about where most people are affected by the rising sea levels. My country, your country, we are also if the numbers are not enough, here's some very nice photos you may have seen before. And we know that sea level rise can cause more rapid increase in the tide and also the storm surge levels. They can push the water further inland and cause more coastal erosion. So that's kind of very true things for us to remember that the sea level rise is just happening around us. And also I want to share the photo because wave up to 8 meters just hit the northern coast of the Sydney city. And this is a photo where that event called in-grounding swimming pool just collapsed from the house that's happening. Here is another photo shared from the Malaysia's event happened just last year. So in 2021, the heavy rain just continued to affect the coastal city in Malaysia. And this event has never happened in the past 1 century. It just happened. And happened around us and happened more and more frequently just between you and me. So we all know sea level matters. We want to know more about sea level rise. That brings what my research is doing now actually. So we know pretty well about the past because it's already the data set we have from the observations, but we want to know more about the future, how much the sea level will rise in the future. That's very important for us. Okay, that brings me to my current research on the sea level rise projection. We all know that in that projections, the sea level rise projections were mainly based on the extrapolations of the observations and also expert analysis because in that time our physical models were not ready or not good enough to provide us more accurate sea level rise projections. But our ice sheet modeling community and climate modeling community, they have done tremendous efforts to make it happen. A latest attempt was led by the ISMIP6. It's like sheet models together for Antarctica and Greenland to provide their sea level projections from the different ice sheet models. And this plot here I want to show you is from the 2100 years projections from the Antarctic ice sheet. We can see that these colorful lines are all the projections from different climate models. The thick lines are the mean average for each climate model, and its range is provided by different ice sheet models. We can see that ice rather than losing ice. That can be true based on our current observations. So I want to let you know that there are still large uncertainties in our current projections. But if you look at this purple line from the HEDGEM 2, it still can provide very large Antarctic ice mass loss. I want to mention that our ISMIP6 results are mainly based on the past generation of scenarios. So the team wants to provide more latest projections. And the Greenland team try try to combine this using the emulation of the ice sheet models to provide the land ice projections to sea level rise under the new emission scenarios. So this is a map showing us what's the land ice contributions before end of the 2100 years. And if we look at this block here in the main projections, if we could limit the global warming to 1.5 degree, actually the sea level contributions and in these projections we found that the Antarctica is not sensitive to these different scenarios. They are totally same. But if we think everything in a very pessimistic way, the Antarctica's contribution to sea level rise could be 5 times higher. So this gives us this part projections. Like what I just said, so the uncertainty is still pretty large in our projections, especially from Antarctica. So for our ice sheet community, we still need to do more to contribute to the IPCC report, IR6 report can finally use the results from the ice sheet models. This is what we saw here. Everybody here should be very familiar with this photo. In the top photo here is showing us the sea surface temperature is going to be under different scenarios, and the plot on the bottom just give us an idea about how much the sea level will rise before the end of this century. We can see that. I want to mention that as part of the ISMIP around 63 centimeters and 100 centimeters. That's still pretty big, large range. But here, what I want to emphasize is this, the dashed line. So the possibility of like around 2 meters sea level rise before end of the century or 5 meters before end of 2300 could not be ruled out because there are still large uncertainties in our be confidences that it's less than 1 meters because 2 meters might be possible. Okay, back to my current research. Earlier this year, the ISMIP 6, they just sent a call to our contribution to extend our experiment to another 200 years before end of the 2300. The highlighted area is just what I did as our group to contribute to the second phase of the ISMIP 6. Finite element action model. We use the model to build a mesh, try to simulate the how the ice flows on the ground. And here I want to mention that the plot on the right just shows us the current, the fastest glacier on the West Antarctica is Twist and Parent. So we try to use a very high resolution mesh to capture the ice flows near the grounding line. So grounding line we are mentioning, it means is where the ice become float from ground. How the ice flows on the bed of the ground, and also another key important factor is the ice viscosity. Those who connected will be simulated by calculating the mismatch between our observed and simulated ice surface velocity. Once we got those two key parameters, we can use our model and then consider the model by the forcing files provided by the ISMIP and mainly for CMIP 5 and CMIP 6 climate models. So the plot on the right is the how the forcing the 6 model provides more ice mass loss on the surface, and on the left is the basal mass flux. It's how much ice melting underneath the ice shelf. It's an output from our models. We can see that in the first 100 years, there's no too much difference between CMIP 5 and CMIP 6, but after 2100 years, you can see large difference. There are more mass loss predicted from the CMIP 6 model. plot on the right, this is our latest research based on the model result give us a general idea about how much the ice will contribute, the ice from Antarctica contribute sea level rise before the end of 2300 years. You can see that in our model, the green color means the low emission scenarios, other color lines all under high emission scenarios. No matter it's low or high, our contribution always positive. It's not like what the estimate 62100 showed us. Antarctic is always losing ice. But under our high emission scenario, we still have a pretty large range from 33 centimeters to above like 200 centimeters. And next, I want to give you not very extreme, but it is our simulations based on the high H mass loss from our experiment. It's a popular. I just show you here. And my PhD student Yuan made a contribution to this animation. In this animation, it mainly shows us how ice flows on the Antarctic surface, and the color means red means it flows very. Another thing I want to mention that please pay attention to the black line here. The black line is just what I mentioned, the grounding line. That's where the ice become float. It's very important for our ice dynamics because that's where the sliding on the base. And also last one is very popular term recently. It's called the rapid ice cliff collapse. And this mechanism has been ignored in most of our actual model simulations. The second one is our different action models, how we set up our models, how we, what kind of boundary conditions live with. This differs from like what I just mentioned, the different forcings provided by ceiling 5, ceiling 6, and how much confidence we have from those models. That's another big source of these large uncertainties. For myself, and in my future session, I will mainly focus on the two key processes. One is ice-ocean interaction. Another one is like what I said, how the subglacial hydrology will affect the base of the ground ice. When I say ice-ocean interaction, I already set one of my foot into contribute to part of the ice-ocean coupled modeling community. And in that research, we just use idealized domain to try to simulate how the ice-ocean interaction will give us a general idea about how fast the ice melt underneath the ice shelf. And in that research, we just did a research about what kind of choice we can have in our coupled model setup. It's kind of very basic study to improve our projection in our sea level rise. To the next slide. Can we go to the next slide? Okay, yeah, here is the last very fancy animation I want to show you. This is ocean simulations from a model called the RUMS ice shelf. RUMS ice shelf is a terrain following model. It can capture the features following the terrain and also can provide us like also some process-based projections, mainly about like the tidal-driven missile melting. In this model, we can see it should be animation, but it's not playing, but it's fun. And from this model result, we can get like how the ocean surface temperature changed over time, and also how the ocean circulation evolves with time going. So in the future, we plan to just couple our ocean model from this product and also our ice sheet model, try to simulate the ice-ocean interaction while we did the projection in our models. So hopefully in the future we can have more confidence in our ice sheet projections to the sea level rise in our future project. Yes, finally, I want to end my talk using the quote on our cover page of our State of Cryosphere 2022. If you have an interest in this, we have a copy at the reception. Please feel free to have one. And yes, last I want to say, as the world leaders, they can negotiate the budget emissions, different emissions targets. But the one thing we can't negotiate is the melting point of ice. So yes, thank you. That's my talk. We'll have our speaker, Spencer from Chile. He will give us a nice talk. Thank you.
Which one do I use? Yeah? This one? Okay. Yeah. Hello? Yeah. Well, hello everyone. I'm happy to be here. Thanks to the ICCI for the invitation and to participate with you. It's quite an unique experience. My name is Sebastián Ruiz. I'm a researcher from Chile. I'm now doing a postdoc on permafrost hydrology in the high mountains of the Andes. And I work now, as I said, in the Pontifical Catholic University in Chile. but I'm also affiliated to the Perma-Chile Network, which is a Hungarian network working in high-altitude summits in the Andes, trying to do a latitudinal work to get a monitoring which can be representative of what's going on in the southern cone of South America. And my research interests are water catchment hydrology and also landscape value and its evolution. So first of all, I wanted to give a brief introduction about what's the context for mountain cryosphere research, and more importantly about the concern. So this illustration tries to picture what is for the researchers to enter into these sometimes uncertain and unknown places which we want to understand and then to share with non-expert audiences, because it's relevant for water management design in dry areas like the central north part of Chile, for example. So briefly about the concern, this is taken from an article we published some weeks ago, and the important thing as an introduction for the concern about water resources is the interpretation of our human role as researchers and as citizens, but also the interpretation of threats, because either we exaggerate or we neglect threats. It's something that might play against us in the short term. So some of these topics need to be evaluated with transdisciplinary networks, which is in part what we are doing here as well. So I wanted to start by explaining something about landscape, because in general in the legislations we talk about landscapes. What sometimes we neglect the internal attributes which deliver high amount of uncertainty in what we can analyze, but also the agent types of forcing in the mountain cryosphere elements. This type of uncertainty, which can be explained by very old discussions, for example, between Bernatsky and Ilin, we might take part in research through different disciplines. There's always uncertainties that can be coupled quite good. So this is an amplification of uncertainty which may lead us to understand certain settings as wrongful character of totality, and that we can deliver a result thinking that we're talking about the totality, but it's actually not the same. And the risks that we want to deliver to the citizens. So in specific, with the uncertainties and the problems with the hydrological cycle, we can, for example, talk about the scarce representation of permafrost as a pool bearing huge uncertainties because of the complexity of understanding subsurface processes without the invasive methods, which are sometimes used in mining companies that advise good practices, but are not quite available sometimes for the academic researchers. And so the complexity of uncertainties as such is something that can be read in certain legislations. So for example, in the environmental impact assessments in my country, in Chile, we can see sometimes that there are certain concepts that are still used, but do bear certain ambiguity with them. So about the importance of protecting certain elements, they're talking about a concealed value, and a concealed value is sometimes something that is just written that way because it's quite unknown in the present time of analysis, and then it will take at least a decade to be, for certain, be put in as a framework of protection that will specifically detail what is needed to protect the try to research. As an example too, we can analyze mountain cryosphere environments, but the problem will be the evolving timescales for water supply. So in this sense, we may approach the forcing agents, we might model certain to calculate everything. But what's going on at higher altitudes, it's sometimes a bit more difficult to grasp. And one of the be groundwater, and upon, for example, permafrost degradation, it might change the peak, delay the peaks, and also flatten the curves of groundwater flow, and this will have, of course, many ecological impacts that, for certain, will change the whole hydrological budget that is done regionally or even at subcontinental scale. And this briefly in a threshold will lead to a new ecological scheme, and this is something that is, just to put briefly, that will affect not only the supply dimension of water resources, but also the temperature of what we can call a static catchment or biodiversity, etc. So, going to what I do in specific, this is a transboundary catchment, a transboundary aquifer that is located between the frontier, the border of Argentina and Chile at around 4,000 meters of altitude. And as you can see, you have glaciers, but you also have some mappings that give the notion that there's permafrost, mountain permafrost therein. So I wanted to analyze what's going on there, and this was my last work. Some of the stuff that we analyzed and came up with relate with the groundwater buffering that proglacial areas may deliver. So in very simple terms, by using multi-proxy analysis with isotopes and genomic analysis, which are coupled with the hydraulic parameterization of a catchment, we can understand more or less what would be the time scale that the infiltration can be stored multi-annually in a proglacial area. So, for example, the hydrological budget that you can measure on surface, it has some components that are previous infiltrations. For example, by using tritium as a decaying isotope, we can have an idea that these timescales are around a decade. So sometimes you might have certain volumes of water that are part of the mix that you will measure at the lowland, which belong to previous decade, but more or less previous years. So you have a delay in what you're reading as a mixture of volumes of water at surface, which sometimes is related with thawing. So that are psychrophiles, cold-loving bacteria, where in the same samples that we analyzed for isotopes, for water isotopes. And so groundwater springs that were activated by the end of the warm season, they had this kind of signature. So we could understand that these thawing sources are also an element that is coming to the streams later in the season. So this gave that can be detected by signatures of water isotopes and also by the genetic identity. Now, more about the research that I'm doing now as a postdoc. It's located at Ojos del Salado in Atacama Desert. So this is high altitude settings, 5,800 to 6,800 meters. And here we want to understand more or less what would be the differences if we simulate the groundwater flow in areas that are with a lesser amount of permafrost. So you have a more isolated permafrost distribution at some sites, and then at the higher altitude sites you have very, very cold conditions. And this will be understood, and this is being approached by understanding the aquifer as an evolving unit that has a surface component which is a forest component under the RCP scenarios, and this will be simulated in ModFlow and Fluix PBI and some other software. But the main point that we want to understand and the research question is what will happen with the aquifer storage. So the aquifer storage as an evolving unit might or might not actually be affected by permafrost degradation. So there's evidence that even though permafrost might be under degradation, it might not affect the local groundwater flow or even the regional flow within 100 years. So these are changes that might be happening, but they would have an impact beyond our grasp, our current grasp in the next century, for instance. Nevertheless, their impact at the local scale will be an ecological impact for all the biodiversity that exists there, and which is quite unique because of the conditions as a cold desert. So the excursus that I wanted to give is simply by stating that mountain cryosphere is still an unbounded unit and it has an unknown potential. And what I mean with this is that the resilience to depletion that certain aquifers in high altitude settings have might be also a proxy of their value, and by understanding this value or future value, we can understand how to put them and how to prioritize them in the current day legislations. Something about the action plan is that we need to enhance the knowledge transfer and the feed-forward capacity in order to link the hierarchical scales of the hydrological cycle to understand which needs to be focused first, at least in the local scale. And also I wanted to say that we, in mountain cryosphere science, we are still dealing with data gaps that deal not only with the representativity of the spatial resolution, but we do have a problem with the seasonal gap. So during winter, it's very hard to access mountain tops. So either you go in randonnée to get the snow samples, which is something that is quite difficult, but we need to solve these data deserts that are seasonal deserts because they will give us further evidence to calibrate the isotope signatures and all that we need to in order to understand what's going on with the groundwater flow and the whole hydrological cycle. So this is some of my colleague in Ojos del Salado and me recently in the crater of Lonquimay volcano. So that would be it. Thank you very much. Now I want to present the next speaker, Mira Karka. She's from Nepal and she's doing her PhD in Carnegie Mellon University in the US. So, please.
Thank you, Sebastian, for introducing me. How does this works, right? Okay. Which one is the pointer? Pointer. Okay. Thank you. Hello everyone, I'm Mira Khadka. I am a PhD student at Carnegie Mellon University. I'm a third semester student and I'm working with Dr. David Rounds. So my research lies within the domain of glacier modeling. So I work with global glacier modeling, and for this presentation I wanted to focus on high mountain Asia and represent that region in this platform. So talking more about this presentation, I wanted to make this presentation more about my own personal academic journey, how I started my academic career in cryosphere science, what motivates me and what makes me keep going in cryosphere science basically. So I would like to start with a brief introduction of high mountain Asia. Alright, so as we all know, high mountain Asia has the largest ice covers outside of the polar regions. And although we don't have enough field information, the long-term records have shown that there is accelerated increase in glacier mass throughout this region. And there is one more thing that we need to understand. So I come there. Okay, so is it working? Okay. Okay, it's working now, right? Can you confirm? Okay. So there is one more thing that we need to understand about high mountain Asia is that most of the countries in high mountain Asia are financially and politically struggling, right? So when we have all these accelerated mass change and when we have all these changes, these countries are already struggling and they have limited capacities to adapt and mitigate with all these changes. So talking more about glacier changes, so we can look at this figure in projected glacier area change by 2050. And there is something we need to remember, that in the short term, there will be increased discharge in the river basin because of the rapid glacier melt. But as we move towards the long-term period, there will be decreased river flow. And that's gonna affect communities because, so in the short term, when there is increased discharge in the river, so communities will be facing in terms of hydropower and drinking water supply and other water related things. So all these struggling countries need to adapt very quickly with all these changes, and that's a struggle in high mountain Asia. And in this figure, we can see that high mountain Asia is already a disaster prone region. And and I'm not trying to imply that all these flooding events come from glacier changes, which is not true, because we also have extreme monsoon events and westerlies, so those events also create these flooding events. So what I want to highlight is when you look at the high mountain Asia region, Nepal, Bangladesh, and especially Islamabad area, there were thousands of people affected because of these flooding events, right? And when we look closely to the flooding events that happened in Pakistan recently, so here is a comparative figure from August 2010 and August 2020. So we can see that there is increased flooding extent in Pakistan within such a short period of time. cryospheric hazard that is a concern for high mountain Asia is GLOF, glacial lake outburst flood. So whenever there is a glacier change, so there is an expansion in existing glacial lakes as well as an increase in number of glacial lakes in the region. So, and because of that, we have so many glacial lake outburst flood events. And as you can see, this is a very old figure, not very recent, but we can see that there is increased at all, and Dr. Fabian was also a part of this very interesting research who is here in the audience, and we can see from this figure that there is an increased number of future glacial lakes in this region. So when you see the, I don't know how this pointer works, but when you look at the Pakistan region, you can see that there are so many future glacial lakes. And this is already a disaster-prone region when it comes to GLOF. And even this year, there were so many GLOF events in Pakistan, right? It is to adapt. Yeah, so with this brief information on high mountain Asia, I want to circle back to my own research interest that I briefly mentioned earlier. So my research domain is glacier modeling and remote sensing. So I am mainly passionate about the cryosphere processes and how those model outputs drive our projections and everything. But as a cryosphere researcher coming from Nepal and high mountain region and high mountain Asia, I'm also very passionate about the social and policy implications, right? Our projections. And yeah, so there is one thing I have always been interested to explore is understanding the uncertainties coming from our projections. So in the next few slides, I will be discussing my previous research work, and I will highlight in detail how all those research projects had so much uncertainties. But yeah, so when we try to reduce our uncertainties in the model projections, what we can do is we can drive more effective policies in the region. And that is one of my research interests as a glacier modeler. So yeah, moving forward, I would like to very briefly discuss one of the previous research work that was recently published in the Journal of Glaciology, and how this research motivated me to move forward with my own PhD research that I have been doing right now. Okay, so in this research, what we did was we experimented with a coupled modeling technique. So as you can see in this figure, so first we have open global glacier model developed by Dr. Fabian. And yeah, so this is a very state-of-the-art glacier evolution model, and we used this model to project future glacier area and future glacier volume. And we provided that information to glacier hydrological degree model, which is developed in Nepal by Dr. Rijan Bhakta Kayastha. And okay, so in the second model, when you look at that model, you can see that there are so many calibration parameters. So I want to highlight a few. So there is degree factor for snow, clean ice, debris covered ice. There is temperature lapse rate. There is precipitation gradient. We also had runoff coefficient for our waste flow. So there is uncertainties coming from all these models. And what we have to remember that this region is already lacking field information, right? So we don't have enough field information on degree factor, temperature lapse rate, precipitation factor. So because of that lack in data, because of that lack in field information, there is so much uncertainties in our model projections. And that is one of my research interests that I mentioned earlier. So yeah, so moving forward, here is just a quick visual representation of what goes within OGGM processes, from pre-processing to flow line module estimation, mass balance estimation. And I want you to focus on the last figure where we have glacier area and glacier volume projections for Khumbu Glacier, which is one of the very important glaciers in Dudh-Kosi River Basin in Nepal. Yeah, and so when we have the glacier area and glacier volume for a single glacier, we compile that for the entire basin, and this research was carried out for all river basins in Kosi River Basin, sub-basins in Kosi River Basin, right? So, yeah. Okay, so this is weird because I had text over there and now it's all symbols. But okay, anyway, so this is another slide showing results from our glacier evolution model. And here we can see the drastic decrease in glacier area and volume in all of the 6 river basins. And so there was, in the text that is not shown right now, there was this percentage like 65 to 75 in glacier area and volume by through our RCP 4.5 and 8.5 scenarios. But I think it's very clear from the figures that there is a very drastic decrease, and especially on the right side when you focus on the Likhu River Basin, which is a very small river basin within Kosi River Basin, and the river basin is around 800 square kilometer, right? It's a very small river basin, and in that river basin we can see that by the end of the century the entire glacier area will be gone. So the glaciers will completely disappear, and there are so many hydropower projects in that river basin dependent on the glacier melt. So that is a very critical issue in this region. So I want to quickly go through, so as I mentioned earlier, there were 2 models, right? So I showed the results from the glacier evolution model, and this one is from the glacier hydrological model. And the major conclusion from the glacier hydrological projection was that the wet seasons are getting wetter and dry seasons are getting drier in this region. And we can also clearly see the change in the peak month, right? So this monsoon, I was in Nepal, so it was not working this whole time. It was working, right? Okay. So I was in Nepal during this monsoon season, and monsoon is usually from June to September, but this year it was until the end of October. And as a researcher working within glaciology and hydrology domain, I already struggle understanding all these extreme events because they are changing so quickly, right? And then so I keep trying to figure out different ways, how can I communicate this information with stakeholders and policymakers, how can we make them understand the science behind the glacier modeling and all these projections. And before we provide them all the information from our projections, it is very crucial that we reduce our uncertainties within the model. Okay. Okay, so at the end of that research, we carried out a model sensitivity. And I think it's very understandable that the model was very sensitive to the temperature lapse rate because the model was using a temperature-dependent melt module. So those are few of the things how our results are influenced by the calibration parameters, by the model physical processes, right? So yeah, and so this research experience was very helpful to me to understand the direction that I wanted to go in my PhD, right? So yeah, and so some of the research limitations were we did not include the debris factor in this research, and like I mentioned, the research was clearly very over parameterized, which is the main critical issue, and we did not carry out the uncertainty assessment. So yeah, so in my current PhD research, I'm working with Dr. David Rounds, who developed this amazing state-of-the-art model, Python glacier evolution model. And in this model, it has the Bayesian inference, which is used to quantify the uncertainties that come from model parameters as well as the climate data. Okay, so if we focus on this figure on the left, we can see that on the y-axis we have mass balance, and on the x-axis we have temperature bias, which is one of the calibration parameters of PySM, including degree factor for snow and precipitation factor. So there are 3 calibration parameters, and yeah, so it might sound like it's only 3 parameters, but as I mentioned earlier, we don't have enough information on these parameters, so our model is over parameterized. So what we do is, okay, so one more thing, if we look at the figure, the gray area, it shows that whenever you have the lines going through that gray area, that is the optimum value that you can use for calibration. But even with just 3 calibration parameters, you can see that the model can have infinite combinations of all these calibration parameters. So that's an issue. And with Bayes theorem, with Bayesian inference, what we are trying to do is we are trying to combine the prior information that we already have on calibration parameters, right? So for example, if we have information about one of the calibration parameters, if we have information on temperature bias, we combine our prior information with the observed data to estimate the posterior probability distribution, and the mean and variance of posterior distribution will give us the uncertainties of the calibration parameters as well as the optimum values that we can use for model projections or for calibration. Okay. So talking more about uncertainties, there is one more thing we have been trying to do. So as I mentioned earlier, along with glacier modeling, I'm also very passionate about remote sensing, and we have been using SAR dataset. This is one of the examples from Alaska that we have been doing. And so this figure is very colorful and pretty, but when you look closely, okay, so the first one, it's from April, right? So as we move from April towards June, so there is increased glacial melt on the glacier surface. So when there is melt, the backscatter, the SAR backscatter value gets observed, so there is less backscatter in summer months, and red is the high value of backscatter, and blue is obviously the less value of backscatter. And based on this variability of SAR backscatter and strength, what we are trying to do is we are trying to develop a product of glacier melt extent all over Alaska, and then we provide that information to have information on temperature bias. So if you remember from the earlier slide, temperature bias is one of our calibration parameters. So when we have prior information on one of the calibration parameters, then we can use that to reduce our overparameterization issues. So these are some of the things that we have been working on. I'm still getting started with my PhD, so I'm very excited where it goes. And yeah, definitely, so whenever we have reduced uncertainties in our model parameters, then I'm very excited that it will drive better policies, especially in high mountain Asia. And yeah, one more thing I wanted to share earlier, but I think I forgot. So Nepal submitted their second NDC in 2020, I think. In 2020, right? So when I was going through that report, I was like, okay, so we have very ambitious plans for our NDC, right? But what about the cryosphere changes? Like, we need to reduce emissions and everything, but I think they failed to highlight the cryospheric issues in high mountain Asia, like how those emissions are going to drive the glacier melt. And I think those are the little things that I want to keep working on along with my PhD issues to drive better policies in Nepal. So yeah, these are my references, and thank you. And I think we'll be taking questions at the end of the presentation. Thank you so much. Okay, so yeah.
So we're actually going to do a brief Q&A now with the three previous speakers, and our fourth early career scientist will go at a different time. Keep track of the schedule for that because it's a fantastic presentation. But we have for the 1 o'clock session some people in New Zealand as well as in the UK, but especially those in New Zealand want to get to bed, so we can't start too late. So if there are any questions, either for Mira, or for Chen, or for Sebastian, please.
Thank you.
I have a question for Chen as first. You said you're using adaptive meshes, so to have more information very close to the grounding line, and then when you do this very long simulation, is the model actually able to adapt to these changes of the grounding line's position and changes the mesh with time?
That's a very good question, thanks. Actually, for now, in our model, we just use a fixed mesh. So actually, when the ground line retreat in ground quickly, in the new area, the mesh resolution is pretty coarse. Actually, that's largely, reduce our confidence about our model results. But luckily, in the model, I use LMIs. Actually, in the future, we will apply a different mesh while it's going on with time, and then the mesh can adjust its resolution by according to the velocities. That's one way, and also the distance from the grounding line. So that's doable now, but yeah, that's our plan. Thanks for the question. Any other questions for three of us?
Hi, yes. There was a lot of technical data in those presentations, and I was just wondering about some of the more policy implications of what your data is trying to affect and what you would like to come out of it.
So this one is for Chen, right?
For me?
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Okay, I'll say first. So in my presentation, I showed very clear what our model shows us, like how sea level will rise based on the model till the end of 2300 years. And the message is very clear and simple. It's going to lose ice very rapidly if we didn't commit like 1.5 degree. And something is going to happen very quickly in the next few decades, if we don't do really real action on it. That's, yeah. We can't, like what I said in the last slide of my talk, and we can't not negotiate the melting point of the ice. That's the truth. That's very clear.
Yeah, so the message from my research would be, I think I mentioned that several times because I keep talking about uncertainties, but I think it would be that as a researcher, we need to keep working towards reducing uncertainties in our model projections, because that is where, yeah, because that will drive better policies, like I mentioned earlier, and I think that is something, a clear message for researchers.
Hello. Yeah, in my case, I would just say that I focus on trying to give the best advice to, as an input to the legislations, because the legislations often will derive in what's needed as an education approach and citizen information. So this is, for me, is key as a simplification of what it all represents, because these all subjects sometimes are quite subjective. One way of solving this subjectivity is trying to approach it from the legislative perspective. So that would be my my opinion.
Any other questions? Okay, so I think we're ready for the next presentation, and okay, we're not. Okay, so we'll go when it's.
No, as I said, we will reschedule Ugo's presentation for a later period, and we really thank the three of you for presenting right now. There will be just about a 10-minute break, and then we will go into a discussion actually about sea ice.
Hi everyone on the Zoom. Can you all see and, well, not see, but can you hear us okay at the Cryosphere Pavilion? Wonderful. If you wouldn't mind, yeah, just unmuting so that we can just test that we can hear all of you, that would be great.
Hello, can you hear me, Jane Francis?
We've got you, Jane, yes. If the others wouldn't mind doing the same. Hello, yes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, we've got you,
Stephanie.
Stephanie. Thank you.
And Jane Rumble?
Brilliant. Thank you all. We'll be starting shortly then.